Ciarlaigh, and welcome, Minister, back to the Chamber, and thank you for your contribution. If I could start first with regard to the Personal Insolvency Bill, and to start on a positive note, it's a large piece of legislation which I've read. It's complex, but we do welcome and will support the reduction in the bankruptcy term from 12 years to 3 years. There are aspects within it, Minister, I think that, and the purpose of this as well, that do need to be looked at, and very seriously in my view, and in my party's view at that. What we have here in this situation, if you look at the the debt relief certificate on the unsecured debt, if we could deal with that, those matters first, that the threshold that we've set, or the government have set to avail of this, is extremely high, with regard to the fact that you have a net disposable income of €60 per month, and net assets of no more than €400 on the unsecured debt side. So pretty much it will apply to anyone who pretty much doesn't have a car or doesn't have any asset whatsoever. And I think that in that regard, I think that more will need to be done. But more importantly, you've given the figures out today on the mortgage side, which I've been raising from time to time, and many members across this House of all parties. There's a figure of 10.2% in mortgage arrears of 90 days or more. Your department will also have figures, and the banks will have figures of those in arrears between 30 and 90 days that are coming along that track, and that figure is closer to 15%. And I would ask you genuinely, what would your view be on those 15% of people who hold residential mortgages be? How many of them approximately would be actually helped by the personal insolvency legislation that has been published last week by the government? My view is not very many in its current form. Why, I would say, for a number of reasons. I think that the veto that has been put in of the 65% of creditors, which for most people will be the bank themselves. Most people, the mortgage will be 65% or more of their debt. We have effectively left a situation now whereby that the veto does apply, that the creditors will have to sit around and agree for someone to proceed further with this. Also, with regard to where people will be at that stage. What I'm missing in this, and I want to ask you a question, Minister, I know it's not in this bill, but we're dealing with people who are extremely distressed, who have come to the end of their tether and have no other alternatives to obviously take a big step, towards personal insolvency or bankruptcy. It's a massive step for people to take. The one thing that's missing, and you've alluded to it in your speech though, is the mortgage arrears resolution strategies from the banks. And we've heard again that that's going to be shortly. There are tens of thousands of people now. The Irish League of Credit Union report recently bore that out, that over 50% of families, after all the bills are paid, have less than €100 a month to spend. So the nut that needs to be cracked is actually not necessarily just the people who are in severe mortgage difficulties need to be helped, but those who are just keeping their heads above water. Because for domestic demand to improve in the economy, you've said it yourself that is flat. Forbearance and a moratorium is fine, and that was brought in by the previous government as well. But I said it at the time, I'll say it again, it's not enough. Because we haven't moved forward with items like zeroising of interest, like split mortgages, which I would be interested to see more. So I would like to know, Minister, have you set a time frame for the banks to actually come back with what you call the mortgage arrears resolution strategies? And are all lenders committed to that, not just the covered institutions? Because that would be a very important part of it. The fact, getting back to the personal insolvency bill, that the veto exists at such a high threshold, we had proposed a bill that there would be an independent debt settlement office, that it would be arbitrary, and that I know the Minister for Justice said, well then, that would not be constitutional. Well, that's not correct. Once someone has recourse to the courts, and once the agency can have recourse to the courts, well then we can do that. I think it would personally be, far preferable whereby a lender and a mortgagee were to submit their position to someone who is truly independent, who can make an arbitrary ruling on it. Regardless of, instead we have a situation whereby now we're going to have all the creditors sitting around the table with the borrower, with this personal insolvency advisor. We don't know how they're going to be regulated yet or how that's going to work out, but take it that will happen. And so it's stacked against the person straight away. The fact that there is no appeals process, and those that worked in the Justice Committee on this, that was a very strong recommendation that came from the report, that there's no appeals process. If the decision is taken, as the bill currently stands, that if the lenders decide, well no, I'm not accepting your application. 65% of creditors don't. Well, where does someone go then? And I think that is something that is missing and that should be looked at. The Minister for Justice has said that he doesn't expect this to be enacted until at least October. But I really think an appeals mechanism should form a significant part of this bill. Areas like we were promised that it would be a non-judicial process. Again, I'm wondering how the courts are actually going to be able to deal with all of these orders, and why we're going down the road of a judicial process. That, to me, seems that people who, many of them through no fault of their own, and I'm not talking about the people who you refer to in your speech who can pay and don't want to. No, I believe there's very, very few of them. I think that would be minute in the figures, and I was interested to see that you allude to that in your own comments. But you know, we're effectively going to be bringing people through the courts here who have already been going through an extremely difficult time. I do want to get back to your mortgage arrears resolution strategies, as you referred to, and it places strong onus on mortgage lenders to develop these solutions and present them to the central bank. I really would like to know when. You're right in what you say. This is extremely complex. But the figures that you gave at the start, that every year the mortgage arrears situation is getting worse. Fortunately for most people, that because of the low ECB lending rate that is there, most people will actually, those who are on variable or tracker mortgages, not even all those who are on variable, have actually had their mortgage interest rates reduced. But again, I'd like to ask you that the only lender who actually gave the full reduction the last time was AIB. Bank of Ireland were let off the hook. ICS, who's owned by Bank of Ireland, by the way, have one of the highest variable lending rates. Permanent TSB, a small reduction for existing customers. So they're the thousands of people there who are struggling to pay, and it won't come up on your arrears figures here. Those people are really struggling, who are 3 months or more in arrears. But as I said earlier on, we reckon about 15% of people are in arrears from 30 days to 90 days. But then there's the other, okay, I'll conclude on this, then there is the other group of people, and I would put it to you, Minister, that is most crucially important. If you want to see an increase in domestic demand, and if you want to see, as you were quoted in saying, the economy taking off like a rocket, the economy ain't going to take off like a rocket any day soon, unless that we can actually free up disposable income for hard-pressed mortgage owners. Things like extension of mortgage terms. I'm not talking about debt write-down. Things like the split mortgages which you've referred to and zeroising of interest. Because all a moratorium does for someone is add to their interest bill at the end of the day and makes the situation worse at the end of the day. And finally, I'll conclude on this. The mortgage to rent scheme, in my view, is an absolute con. And is an absolute, total and utter con, and I would never advise anyone to go down that line. The idea that someone who paid thousands and thousands of euro to a lender is then going to hand their own house over, that the local authority who are going to manage it, and that you're going to pay rent for your own house back. Like, where are we taking into consideration the mortgages that have actually been paid? And I don't welcome the fact that 60 people are already availing of this scheme. I don't welcome the fact that there may be 100 people or 100 families who will access this scheme. I'll conclude on this. Minister, look, I welcome you, as always, into the House, and thank you for the update you've given us. But the personal insolvency bill, your colleague Minister Brian Hayes said this would be a game changer. He said that to me in the House here a few weeks ago. This is not a game changer. A lot more needs to be done on it. Thank you.